Welcome to day one of trying to get out of this reading slump. When you're in a slump, the last thing you want to do is pick up a book that's 500, 600, 700 pages. At least that's how I feel about the situation. I wasn't really sure if this vlog was going to help me in my goal, but well, we've all been there. A reading slump that has no end, and you begin to lose the will to read altogether. How do we get away from that? Well, welcome to Leandra the TBR0, your guide to getting out of a reading slump. The first thing you need to do is leave town. Grab those keys, get out of Dodge, and wait, hold on. Okay, let's not get too hasty here. We've all been in a reading slump, and yes, you begin to feel like there is no end, that any book you pick up is doomed to be a DNF, a 3-star reader blower, and it's not a great time. And that is why I have started a reading vlog dedicated to doing a couple tips that we tend to see on Booktube for getting out of said reading slump. But what tips am I going to be tackling in this reading slump vlog? I have 3 in mind. The first one I'm doing is going to be reading a reread, a book I read before. The second tip I'll be doing is to read a short book because we all need that quick win to get back on that horse as soon as we can. And then the third tip I'll be doing is to return to an author that I trust, an author that I've read before that I feel as though will see me through this reading slump. That means I'm going to be reading 3 books, and I'll let you know by the end if I feel like I have officially conquered the reading slump or if it has conquered me. Wish me luck, and I'll see you on the other side. On that note though, if you have other tips for getting out of a reading slump, please include them in a comment below, because I'm sure that those who gravitate towards this vlog are going to be people who are desperately in need of this type of help. So please be sure to let us know how you best get out of a reading slump when it happens to you. Okay, thanks in advance. Welcome to day one of trying to get out of this reading slump. The first tip I'm going to tackle is to reread a favorite. So this is a piece of advice we see all the time on Booktube. If someone is struggling with their reads, maybe they're DNFing left and right, this girl, or they're just picking up math reads. All of their books are 3 stars. What's going on? They're searching for a 4 or 5 star. And so a lot of times you'll say, hey, why don't you just go back, read a book that you know you loved, and call it a day. So I think this is really sound advice, and I can see it working for a lot of types of readers. However, it depends on how you go about it, how successful it ends up being. So there are 2 different camps on Booktube, in my opinion. One are the frequent rereaders, the people who reread all the time. They have maybe a handful of books that they read every single year. They just keep going back to those characters, keep going back to that world, and those are their tried and true favorites. It's a safe bet. Then there is the camp of readers who maybe reread once or twice a year, if at all. Maybe they never reread. And so it's very daunting to suggest to just simply reread a favorite. And they're like, this is new territory for me. How do I go about this? Well, for those types of readers who are actually like myself, I would provide a bit of a caveat saying, yes, try rereading a favorite, but make it a recent favorite, something that maybe you loved in the last year, as opposed to something you read 3, 4, 5 years ago. And that's because our reading states change. Our reading tastes change. With every single book we've read since that first read of that title, we have slightly changed as people, as readers, and our moods are just kind of following the way of the wind. So I would say that it's a bit riskier to read something that you read 5 years ago and then never touched it again. That doesn't sound like a very ideal situation for me, and it's a recipe for trouble, especially if you end up realizing it's no longer your taste, it's no longer an all-time favorite. Then that actually could dig you deeper into the slump you're already in. So for me, as someone who doesn't reread very often, I am going to be following my own advice and reading a recent favorite, and that is Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. So I read this back in March, so it's only about 4 years old on my shelf, and I listened to the audiobook the first time around. It was actually very spontaneous, and I think that's why it makes it a really perfect book. It wasn't an anticipated read, it was just something I decided to try on a whim. It was available on Libby, and I was actually doing research for Battle of the Booktubers to see if if this could be a book I could recommend to Danny, the host of that battle. And I was just so pleasantly surprised. I had a great time. It was very funny. It was very creepy. And the world of Night Vale is so complex and strange. And I wanted to get back to it as soon as I finished the book. So this was the perfect candidate for rereading a recent favorite. And so this is really interestingly inspired by a podcast. Actually, I haven't listened to the podcast still. I know, I need to get to it. But what I'm interested in doing next is reading the next book in the series that's called It Devours. And before I do that, I did want to reacquaint myself with the world. And I am listening to the audiobook again, but because I have the physical copy as well, I think that this is a great way to also introduce a second tip that follows rereading. So if you're someone who's really hesitant to reread, an additional way to perform this tip is to change up the formatting, keeping it fresh for you as a reader, especially if you're going the way I said, is to read a book you literally just finished. So I am listening to the audio again, but because I've got the physical copy, I'm doing an immersion read. So when I'm laying down for the night, trying to unwind, relax, I'll pull out the physical book and read along with the audio, and it's just been a really lovely time. I'm only a third of the way through, so it's early days, but I can confirm that this feels like the right decision for me. So I'll update you when I finish the book to let you know if the tips actually were successful, if I would recommend other people to perform them, and then I'll move on to the next tip that I should try. I have accomplished the first tip in this vlog dedicated to getting over a reading slump, rereading a past favorite, and I truly think that I've cracked the code.
I've cracked the code.
Because the fact that this was a recent read, but not too recent, I was able to enjoy the familiarity, the comfort of knowing what's going to happen next in the grand scheme of things, the general plot. But when it came to minute details, character monologues, really thoughtful, deep descriptions, those felt fresh and new to me because, of course, I'm not going to keep those locked in my brain after having read it a few months ago. So it was really nice. I'm giving it another 5 stars. I'm starting off this vlog in really great fashion because we have a 5-star read, it was guaranteed, and I understand why this is recommended to people who are in slumps. This is a good tip. I'm confirming it now. I realize though that I never told you all what this book is even about, so if you're interested in reading it, here is a little bit of a taste of the synopsis. So Night Vale is a very strange town set in the American Southwest. It's a desert town, and it affects its residents in very strange ways. Rules, laws, behaviors, customs are all very different compared to how we know it, and the citizens of Night Vale just accept it. The longer you're in this world, the more it makes sense, and you just kind of go with the flow with it, and that's what I really enjoy, the kind of humor that forces this absurdity upon us, and we just have to accept it because the characters do, and no matter how strange it is, they're like, yeah, this makes sense, and you're like, really, does it? It's truly one of the most fun settings I've ever read, but the plot in itself follows 2 main characters among a large, diverse cast. So the 2 characters are Jackie Fierro and Diane Creighton. Jackie is 19, she runs the local pawn shop, and she's just been doing that forever. She can't really remember a time when she didn't do that. She also can't remember a time when she wasn't really 19. And it gets even more interesting the further she begins to look upon herself, wondering, should that feel as strange as it does? Like, why am I like this? Why am I not turning 20? And then we have Diane Creighton, who also is a longtime resident at Night Vale, born and raised. She has a teenage son, and she's really struggling to connect with him. Part of that is because he keeps changing form. He literally is rarely a boy. Sometimes he's a massive bug, other times he has antlers, fur, he's just this small, strange object. He is never the same person, the same kind of being twice. And in Night Vale, you just chalk that up to being like, hey, he's a teenager. He's figuring things out. That's just the way it is. So I really enjoy the kind of extended metaphor for that, because he is learning, he is trying to figure out who he is. So we always feel like we're waking up a different person when we're teenagers. The main plot that brings these two characters together is that there's this man in a tan suit, and he carries a deerskin briefcase around. No one can remember him. They don't remember his face, they don't remember his name. Basically, the entire plot is them trying to figure out who this man in the tan suit is. Why does he keep popping up in their lives? And by finding him, will peace be brought back to Night Vale as they know it? Because right now their lives are just turned upside down. Arguably, I didn't really tell you much, but I think it's better to go in blind. Definitely listen to it on audiobook if you can, because that was the most fun experience. And also, if you're curious, check out the podcast. That might be able to shed some light on the entire situation. I don't know. Having completed the reread, we need another tip to test, and that's going to be read a short book. A lot of times when you're in a reading slump, when nothing's really gravitating towards you, maybe you haven't finished a book in a long time, the recommendation is to read something short. Get a quick win, a short-term piece of satisfaction to kind of raise your confidence before you enter maybe a chunkier read. Because really, when you're in a slump, the last thing you want to do is pick up a book that's 500, 600, 700 pages. At least that's how I feel about the situation. But this being a manga, obviously that fits the categorization of being short. It also happens to be a continuation of a series, so I do get to lean on that kind of comfort as well. It is the third volume in Dinosaurs Sanctuary. I actually have Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading to thank for even putting this on my radar. It was one of her host favorites back with the Amazing Readathon. I read the first 2 volumes during the month of June for that readathon, and I still own volumes 3 and 4. I just haven't gotten to them. So this is going to be my short, quick win. I'm going to feel a lot of satisfaction. I'm going to feel really good about myself once I have this under my belt, and then we can kind of move on to what the next tip is that I should tackle. If manga isn't necessarily the type of format that you would gravitate towards when it comes to a short read, you can always lean on graphic novels, a novella, or even middle grade reads, because those tends to be on the shorter side as well. But if this does sound interesting to you, it follows these characters that are doing their best to keep the doors open to this dinosaur sanctuary. They have a bunch of different dinosaurs of different ages, of different circumstances, and they all deserve a certain kind of love because they've been neglected in one way or another. They're not as flashy as maybe the other parks compared to this one, and it's really wholesome. It's very much a slice of life, and I can't wait to return to this world. All right, let's get reading. Good morning! I have officially finished the second book for this vlog, Dinosaurs Sanctuary Volume 3, and now the question is this tip, reading a short book, actually a success? Is it something that I would recommend other people do if they're in a reading slump? And yes, I would. I feel the short-term satisfaction, I feel the reward of finishing a book in a matter of hours, and I'm actually really stoked. I'm very happy to know that I've finished 2 books this month, and it's all thanks to this reading slump vlog. So thank you, past Leandra, I guess. Thank you, Danny, for recommending that I do this, as I was ranting to her about the fact that I couldn't find a book I'm enjoying this month. So yeah, I'm already feeling a lot better. And with this volume, I actually was really nervous about it. I don't think I mentioned that because I was being all Miss Optimism, but I was a bit hesitant, mainly because obviously coming into this, I read volumes 1 and 2. I loved volume 1, and I didn't feel any type of way about volume 2. I appreciated it, I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as volume 1, and I was worried that with every passing volume, that enjoyment would decline a little bit, and I just wouldn't really care as much. So this was a bit of a risk to continue this series, but I was determined to read a short book, and this was one of the few ones that was gravitating towards me, and it didn't disappoint. I really enjoyed it, and maybe my favorite in this series so far. I can't tell because volume 1 just has like this very special place in my heart, but I really loved the character development in this and the connections that these trainers, that these dinosaur keepers are making with their charges. The dinosaurs are very human. You can see it in their mannerisms, in their actions, in their struggles, and there's actually a bit of a mystery in this one. We have our main character Suzume. She is trying to figure out why this one other dinosaur keeps getting hurt. According to the other dinosaur keepers, this dinosaur is known as being clumsy, but the consistency in his injury, it feels as though it's environmental. Something is causing his injury and they don't really understand what's going on. So they go on a bit of a stakeout, they are monitoring him all night, and I could feel the investment, and maybe it was because it was leaning into this idea of solving a mystery, but I really did love it. And it was really sweet too, because this dinosaur also lost his companion, lost his partner, I believe a couple years earlier, and you can still see him mourning her, and it was really sweet. I love when a narrative features animals, creatures that are non-human characters, and we see ourselves in them even though they aren't human. It's really lovely. So yeah, this was a great experiment so far. I'm doing 2 for 2. I highly recommend rereading a favorite because that worked for me, and I highly recommend reading a short book because that also worked for me. I read it in 2 hours and I felt just as satisfied as far as like being proud of myself for finishing a book as I would if I read like a 400-page one. So this is working out really well. Now we need to try a third tip, and that's going to involve Dread Journey by Dorothy B. Hughes. So the tip that this one is going to be fulfilling is to return to an author that you've enjoyed before. I know what you might be thinking. Technically, because I'm reading the 3rd volume in a manga series, I'm returning to an author, but I think that for this one, it has to be, at least for my completion of it, I'm going to count it as far as like standalones, because you can't keep following in a series. You can, but I feel like that's a separate tip compared to, well, I've trusted this author's writing style before. I've trusted their character development, the story arc, a satisfying ending, but would I trust a new to me author to do that if I just picked up a random book by them? I probably would trust an author with another standalone by them far more, and that's where the comfort in picking up a book like that comes in for a reading slump, because it starts to get a bit nerve-wracking when you're picking up a new to you author and you're like, I don't know what their track record is with me because we don't have one. So am I going to enjoy this? Am I going to like the tropes they've chosen? Are the characters going to progress and grow in the way I want to see them? Whereas with an author you've at least tried once before with another standalone, you can see that they're likely going to at least have the skeleton of a story match what they've done before and just fill it with different organs and tissues, and I gotta stop this metaphor right now. Moving on, I have read one other book by this author before. It was In a Lonely Place. I read it back in December 2023, so it has been about 7 months since I read a book by her, and I've been really meaning to return to this author because I loved the atmosphere. I loved how dark and suspenseful In a Lonely Place was, especially it being set and written in 1940s America. I could really gravitate towards that and feel the fear, especially for the women who are being targeted in that book. Meanwhile, with Dread Journey, I'm imagining this one is still in the hard-boiled detective fiction zone, but it does feel mystery-esque to me, a bit more classic mystery, mainly because of the tropes it's being used. It's a train mystery, one of my favorite tropes in detective fiction. I really don't read enough train mysteries, but the reason why I love it is because they are moving from one place to another, and it's a really closed circle of suspects. So when a crime does occur, you are looking around saying, well, it has to be someone on board, and you're in close quarters with them, the tension's rising, and I really also enjoy the fact that it's traveling from one side of the US to the other coast. So it's a long trip. Tensions are going to just keep rising, and I know there's going to be a murder. So I'm about 15 pages into it so far. I really do need to get back to it. I'm really looking forward to testing out this tip, and really I'm thankful for trying it out because I've been meaning to return to this author and I just haven't had an excuse to do it. So woohoo! Tip number 3, let's see what happens. I have officially finished Dread Journey, meaning that I've completed the 3 tips I wanted to do for this reading slump vlog, and I will say that I am feeling like I'm in a really good place with reading. I wasn't really sure if this vlog was going to help me in my goal, but sitting here now, I'm standing, but standing here now with the 3 books that I finished, I think this was a success. So with Dread Journey, this was the tip in which I returned to an author that I read previously. I really loved In a Lonely Place, and this was my second time with the author. While I didn't love it as much as In a Lonely Place, I'm still gonna give it 4 stars. That rating might go a little bit higher to say a 4.25, but for now I'm sitting on a 4 star, and it was really nice to be with a writer whose writing style I trusted. I knew that we were gonna get to an end that felt good for me, that I was going to have character development that I was invested in, that the overarching tension was going to hold from page 1 to the final lines of the book, and that was really nice. And I understand why people recommend that. Return to the authors that you appreciate, because it's less likely that they'll let you down as opposed to a new to you author where you have no idea what to expect. You don't know what tropes or twists they tend to lean on, and that could be their downfall. With these books, I ended up getting a 5-star reread. I received a 4.5 star for Dinosaurs Sanctuary 3, which was my short book, because just the more I think about this, the more I think it's lovely. So a 4.5 star it is. And then finally, we have my 4-star finish with Dread Journey. This was a super successful vlog. I'm really happy, especially because I ended up getting 2 books off of my TBR list, one of them being a purchased book for 2024, and then this one being a TBR backlist. I actually feel really good about getting those things off of my chest as well. Maybe those add to the idea of other tips you could do. Reading books that you recently purchased that you have been anticipating, that you've been neglecting, and you really want to read, or a TBR backlist, especially if you're feeling the pressures of not reading books that have been on your shelves for years. Maybe that can be a way for you to get out of the reading slump as well and feel good about yourself for reading a book that you've been meaning to read for years. And finally, I will say, you probably noticed this in some of the B-roll, that I did go to a couple bookshops on my journeys because I went and visited family in the past week, and I did end up bringing some books home with me. Depending on the type of person you are, the type of reader, the type of buyer you are, this might be another good tip for you to just freshen your shelves, get a new perspective, go to a bookstore or to your local library and get a few new titles that are really intriguing to you, whether they're ones that have been on your list that you've been meaning to buy or meaning to read, or you're going in blind and just seeing what attracts you. So I ended up bringing home with me 3 books. 2 of them were books I've never read before, and they were gifts I was treated during my visit with family, and another one was a book I read a couple months ago I really loved, and I just haven't picked up a copy since I read it, and that one is My Murder by Katie Williams. I was really excited to see that the paperback came out, and I thought it was meant to be, so I bought myself the paperback copy to put on my shelves and just appreciate and eventually reread. For my 2 books that were gifted to me that I haven't read, I ended up getting Cackle by Rachel Harrison, and this one felt like a really good purchase. It felt like it was meant to be, especially because I did get a signed edition at the local Barnes & Noble that recently opened. It was actually brand new. It just opened in the last year at my home area, so this was the first time I was able to go visit it, and I didn't realize that Rachel Harrison is deemed a local author because she's from upstate New York, so they had a few extra copies that were signed. I picked it up. I also feel like I can trust this book because I know a couple people who have read it and really love it. They champion it on their channel, including Lotta's Nook and Michaela Reads. So I trust their recommendations. Maybe that's another tip you can take home with you, the idea of reading a book that is highly recommended by a friend, because those are people you can definitely trust as well. But I also ended up getting Trust of the Emerald Sea. So speaking of friend recommendations, this one I've seen quite a bit on Booktube in general, but I know that my friend Danny here ended up really enjoying this one, and the bookseller that I was speaking with also really had a great time discussing it with me and basically imploring me to read it at some point, and I was like, you know what? They put in the work. I'm gonna buy this book as well. As excited as I am about these 3 new books on my shelves, one of them being a have read and 2 of them being brand new to me, I can't implore enough that book shopping therapy doesn't have to be your way of coping with a reading slump. And this wasn't my planned way of coping either. I was totally happy with the 3 tips I was participating in, and they really did get me through. But I just thought that I would highlight this as a little bit of a mini book haul because I'm excited about it, but also as an option for those of you who are looking to add books to your shelves anyway, and especially if the things that you are looking at from your library haul or from your own personal shelves aren't gravitating towards you, maybe looking at something fresh, getting a brand new book can be your way of getting out of that slump. Thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. I hope that these tips helped you either in just feeling less alone about a reading slump or adding them to your back pocket the next time you are in a reading slump. If you're not though, please make sure to remember that there are ways of preventing said slump from even occurring. Getting enough sleep, eating well, drinking water, being active, mood reading, DNFing when you feel it's necessary, because honestly, I know I was complaining throughout this video about the fact that I was DNFing at the beginning of July, but realistically, those were probably the best decisions for me. They weren't the books for me, and if I pushed through, the reading slump probably would have lasted longer. So just keep that in mind, that there are tips for getting out of a reading slump just as much as there are tips for preventing the slump from ever occurring. If you enjoyed yourselves, make sure to like the video. Be sure to comment if you have your own tips for getting out of a reading slump, or if you feel like you're in a reading slump right now and you just need some moral support getting out of it, I'm here for you. And consider subscribing if you aren't already. Any of those actions help my channel grow, and I really do appreciate you. I also appreciate my patrons at the Manor, my sleuths, my witnesses, my suspects, and my corpses. We are currently in the throes of Camp TBR-a-thon, and I hope you're all having fun with that. And I really do look forward to seeing you all on the next one. Bye!